Some countries offer you a beautiful view. Others leave you with a question that changes the way you see the land beneath your feet forever. I came to this country to discover its wonders. The dikes standing against the sea. The wind turbines rising from the open water. The Netherlands I had seen countless times through digital images. Endless tulip fields, bicycles, and houses reflected in calm canals. In my mind, it was the Netherlands everyone imagines. Orderly, charming, and seemingly perfect. But as I stepped off the plane, one thought quietly settled into my mind. Most of the land I was standing on lay below sea level. It felt like a nation living upon a silent truce, renewed every single day between people and the sea. At first, everything looked exactly as I had expected, comfortingly familiar. Through the train window stretched the same orderly shades of green I had seen in thousands of photographs. Fields divided by narrow canals, a windmill turning slowly on the horizon, cows grazing peacefully behind fences with their heads lowered. The sky was low, wide, and washed in soft shades of gray and blue, as though the clouds were slowly descending toward the earth. A cyclist leaned naturally into the strong crosswind, pedaling as if nothing about it was unusual. There was no rush, no hesitation. For them, that powerful wind was not an obstacle. It was simply part of the air they lived in. It was beautiful. But after a while, beauty stops telling its story. Photographs reveal the surface, never what lies beneath it. And I had grown tired of looking only at the surface. In this country, the distance between the surface and what lies beneath felt greater than almost anywhere else in the world. Here, below, was not just a metaphor. Every meadow, every house, every perfectly flat road I could see had once been water. Or perhaps, with endless patience, was still waiting to become water again. As I entered the outskirts of the first city, I began to sense it. The canals ran almost level with the roads, the water sitting only inches away from the asphalt. One careless step, and my foot would land not on solid ground, but in the water. Here, land and sea were not separate worlds. They were two sides of the same living surface, woven together. The more carefully I looked, the more signs appeared. The narrow canals beside the fields were anything but random. Every one of them belonged to a carefully designed system. In places, I noticed that behind a low dike, the water actually stood higher than the road itself. Only a narrow wall of earth kept it in place. For a moment, I felt just how fragile the entire landscape truly was. By the time I was surrounded by the quiet rhythm of the city, one question filled my mind. A question I could not yet fully name. Why? Why would a people choose to build their lives so patiently, so beautifully, and so persistently upon land that seemed determined to reject them? I did not yet realize that I had come here not simply to see the answer, but to feel it. That first night, after looking out across the city from my hotel window, I opened a map. A remarkably flat country. So flat that if a Dutch person tells you they are climbing a hill, they are probably talking about a bridge or a man-made rise. Even the country's highest natural point would be considered modest in many parts of the world. But the map concealed something far more important beneath its surface. The numbers surprised me. Roughly a quarter of the country's land lies below sea level. At its lowest point, the ground sits about 7 meters beneath the sea, a depth where a 3-story building's roof would be level with the water's surface. Nearly 60% of the Netherlands also faces the ongoing risk of flooding. This was not a temporary warning for an unusually harsh winter. It was the permanent reality of the country's geography. It took time to truly understand what that meant. Millions of people had deliberately chosen to live where the sea seemed forever ready to reclaim the land. Yet they never retreated. Instead, they put down roots, deep roots, right in the middle of that fragile balance. They built cities, museums, universities, and financial centers. They cultivated flowers, constructed ships, and created one of Europe's most remarkable societies, fully aware that beyond the dikes, the water was always there, waiting with quiet patience. That was the moment when the question finally became clear. How do people build a life upon land that constantly wants to sink beneath the sea? And how do they do it without living in fear? The longer I thought about it, the more I realized this story reached far beyond geography. After all, every one of us builds a life upon ground we can never fully control. The health of the people we love, the passing of time, the uncertainty of tomorrow. None of these are truly in our hands. Yet we still build our homes, make our plans, and wake each morning to continue moving forward. One word stood at the heart of this entire story: polder. Land reclaimed from the sea or from wetlands, enclosed by dikes and kept dry through an endless system of pumps. A polder is not something nature simply gives you. The moment the pumps stop, the water returns. Vast areas of this country exist because of a system that must never stop working, not even for a moment. For centuries, the Dutch kept that system alive, first with windmills, then with steam engines, and today with powerful electric pumping stations. The morning I arrived in Amsterdam, I realized I was visiting a city unlike any other. Amsterdam had not been built on dry land. It had been reclaimed from the water. The entire city rests upon millions of wooden piles driven deep into the mud beneath the marshland. Without them, everything beneath my feet, the palaces, the museums, the canal houses, would slowly sink back into the soft ground. It felt as though the entire city stood upon an invisible skeleton. I stopped beside the famous canal ring, recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. This network of waterways stretches for more than 100 kilometers, wrapping around the historic heart of the city like a carefully woven web. More than 1,000 bridges connect one shore to another, one neighborhood to the next. Here, water was never an obstacle. It was a street, a neighbor, almost a member of the community itself. People had invited the water into the very center of their lives. I wandered through the streets early in the morning while the mist still hovered above the canals. The air was cool and damp, and every breath carried the scent of wet stone and still water. Bicycles glided past me one after another, nearly 1 million of them in the city, more than the number of people who live here. Then I noticed the houses. The old, narrow canal homes leaned ever so slightly forward, backward, and sideways. Over the centuries, the ground had settled, the piles beneath them had shifted, and the facades had slowly come to rest against one another beneath the weight of time. They are often called the dancing houses. Yet they did not seem to be dancing to me. They looked more like neighbors quietly supporting one another just to remain standing. There were homes floating on the water as well. After the Second World War, Amsterdam faced a severe housing shortage, and many people found an answer by living aboard boats. What began as a temporary solution gradually became a way of life. Necessity became habit, and habit became tradition. Today, flower pots decorate their windows, curtains soften the interiors, and the silhouettes of cats rest behind the glass. People enjoy their morning coffee on the water as though it were the most ordinary thing in the world. Perhaps here it truly is. For a moment, I stopped and let history settle around me. During the 17th century, this became one of the world's great trading cities. Ships departed from these canals for distant shores, while wealth flowed back through the same waterways. The era known as the Dutch Golden Age was born from this relationship with the water. A city built upon marshland had become the heart of a global trading empire. Water had always been both its greatest threat and one of its greatest sources of prosperity. I continued walking, and the city revealed itself layer by layer. Beside one square stood one of the world's most celebrated museums. Inside waited light from more than 3 centuries ago. The deep shadows of Rembrandt and the quiet daylight drifting through Vermeer's windows. These artists may not have painted the water itself, but they lived in a city enriched by everything it made possible. Amsterdam transformed maritime wealth into extraordinary works of art. The mud beneath a reclaimed landscape had, in time, become gold and then light. When I stepped back outside, the bicycles were still everywhere, moving endlessly in every direction. Even the canals themselves had never been dug at random. Their elegant semicircles were carefully planned during the Golden Age to serve both commerce and defense, allowing goods to move efficiently across the city while keeping potential enemies beyond the water. Centuries later, these waterways no longer carried cargo or protected against invasion. Instead, they carried the rhythm of daily life. People sat along their banks, watching boats drift quietly by. At the end of one bridge, an elderly man was adjusting the ropes of his boat. His hands were rough from years spent working with the water. I asked him what it was like to spend a lifetime living beside it. He paused, looked across the canal, and smiled. "The water is our neighbor," he said. Then he returned to his work, as though he had simply stated the most ordinary truth in the world. A little farther on, another bridge led me to something unexpected: a floating flower market. Since the mid-19th century, bulbs and flowers have been sold here from barges gently resting upon the canal. As I wandered among the stalls, I noticed paper bags filled with plain brown bulbs. They looked surprisingly ordinary. What I did not yet know was that these modest bulbs would lead me to one of the most memorable moments of this journey. Sleeping inside them was the flower that has become one of the country's best-known symbols, even though its story had begun far from the Netherlands. Later that afternoon, I wanted to see the city from the water itself, so I boarded a small boat. The houses looked like twins, one standing above me in the real world, the other shimmering below in the reflections of the canal. As we passed beneath the bridges, the old stone arches drifted overhead. From the water, Amsterdam seemed to reveal its truest face. When I returned, I found myself standing in front of the country's great transportation hub, Amsterdam Central Station. It, too, had been built upon artificial islands above the water, connecting national and international trains, trams, ferries, and travelers from every direction. Across the river, on the northern shore, a tower rose into the sky, its rooftop home to a giant swing suspended above the city. People laughed as they soared nearly 100 meters above the rooftops, with water stretching beneath their feet. Nearby stood a striking science museum shaped like the bow of a ship, as though the sea itself had decided to come ashore. There was something remarkably consistent about the entire scene. Water above, water below, water everywhere. And people had not settled beside it, but within it. Living here felt like sharing the same room with the sea. That was the moment Amsterdam explained the entire country to me. Nothing here had been created in spite of the water. Everything had been built with it, shaped around it, and adapted to its rules. I had crossed a threshold. I was no longer simply looking at the photographs I had seen so many times. I was living inside them. And the feeling that had first appeared the moment my plane touched the runway became certain. The journey was no longer about the remarkable destinations I was visiting. It had become about the question those places were quietly asking me. There was no turning back. Leaving the city behind, I headed north. Gradually, the scenery began to change. Green fields stretched toward the horizon, dotted with farmhouses, grazing cattle, and the occasional windmill. Everything lay below sea level, protected behind carefully engineered dikes. From time to time, the road rose to cross a canal or river, and in those moments, I could see the water flowing beside me, sometimes even higher than where I was standing. Traveling through the Netherlands meant constantly encountering the surprising relationship between land and water. As I continued north, the trees became fewer and fewer until only two vast elements remained before me: the sky and the sea. And there, between them, appeared a thin line drawn by human hands. The line that persuaded the sea. At first, it looked like nothing more than a road. A long ribbon of gray asphalt stretching toward the horizon until it disappeared into a single point. On one side lay calm fresh water. On the other, the open sea, restless, salty, and shaped by the wind. The only thing separating them was the narrow strip of land beneath my feet. The wind was so powerful that even opening the car windows was difficult. Then I understood its true scale. 32 kilometers, a single dike dividing an entire sea. Behind this remarkable structure lay an extraordinary story. In 1916, a devastating flood swept across the country. Water poured inland, swallowing homes and farmland. After that disaster, the Dutch chose not only to rebuild, but to make sure it would never happen again. They decided to redraw the coastline itself. Construction began in 1927 and was completed in 1932. The project sealed off what had once been the open Zuiderzee, transforming it into the vast freshwater lake known today as the IJsselmeer. Millions of cubic meters of sand, clay, and stone. Thousands of workers battling wind and tides for years. Imagine an entire nation looking at a part of the sea and saying, "From now on, this will be a lake." And then making it reality. This was far more than building a bridge. It was reshaping geography itself. Standing at the center of the dike, surrounded by the endless roar of the wind, I was overcome by a strange feeling. It was as though this structure definitively told the sea, "This is where you stop." Yet the monumental locks at its eastern end still allow ships to pass between fresh water and salt water. The gate was never completely closed. That was the moment I began to understand the Dutch relationship with the sea. And if you truly want to discover why this remarkable destination continues to captivate travelers from around the world, stay with us. Because this journey has only just begun. The Silent Army. I traveled south into the heart of the Delta. The sky hung low once again. Water surrounded me in every direction. And there, standing against the horizon, I found what looked like an army. 19 windmills, perfectly aligned, all facing the same wind in silent formation. Their reflections doubled their numbers upon the water, as though 38 guardians were standing watch over a single mission. Even the name of the place tells a story shaped by water. Kinderdijk, the children's dike. According to local legend, after a great flood centuries ago, a cradle drifted across the receding waters. A cat leaped from side to side, carefully balancing it so it would not tip over. When the cradle finally reached the shore, a sleeping baby inside was found completely unharmed. This small, almost fairy tale-like story somehow seemed to capture the spirit of the entire country. At first, I misunderstood these windmills. Like many visitors, I assumed they had been built to grind grain. But the windmills of Kinderdijk were never meant to produce flour. They were built during the 18th century for an entirely different purpose: lifting water. As their sails turned, intricate wooden mechanisms pumped water out of the polders, the reclaimed land won back from the sea, and gradually raised it toward higher canals until it finally reached the Lek River. One windmill alone could accomplish only part of the task. Together, working as a single coordinated system, they moved water upward, step by step. They were not individual machines, but components of one remarkable mechanism. I stepped inside one of them. As the door closed behind me, the sound of the wind faded, replaced by the steady creaking of ancient timber. Every rotation of the enormous sails cast moving shadows across the room. Darkness and light alternated with each turn, like the steady rhythm of a heartbeat. The interior was dim, damp, and filled with the scent of aged wood. Looking upward, I saw an immense mechanical structure reaching toward the ceiling. A rotating shaft, interconnected gears, and below them, a giant water wheel lifting water like an enormous scoop before pouring it into the next canal. Simple in appearance, yet brilliantly engineered. A single windmill could raise the water only 1 or 2 meters. But 19 of them, arranged in sequence, carried it upward one level after another until it finally reached the river. It was like a staircase, built not for people, but for water. Then, amid the constant sound of the machinery, I noticed the traces of another story. Entire families had once lived inside these windmills. In one corner stood a stove. A small sleeping alcove was built into the wall. Beneath the low ceiling sat a simple wooden table. The miller did not merely work here. This was where he slept, raised his children, and shared evening meals beside the endlessly turning gears. His home existed inside the very machine that protected the country. His children learned to fall asleep to the sound of the rotating wheels, because silence meant danger. If the machinery ever stopped, the water outside would begin to rise. As I left Kinderdijk behind, I realized I was only beginning to understand the lesson Afsluitdijk had introduced. Because at the heart of the story these windmills helped create stood something completely unexpected. A flower brought here from distant lands during the 16th century. A flower that would spark what is often described as the world's first great economic bubble. But before reaching that chapter of the journey, I still had several remarkable places to visit. The Factory of the Wind. North of Amsterdam, I arrived somewhere entirely different. Rows of deep green wooden houses, almost black in color, stood beneath an enormous gray sky that somehow made their colors appear even richer. Windmills once again filled the horizon, but these told a very different story. Even the sound of their turning sails was unlike the windmills of Kinderdijk. These windmills were not pumping water. They were powering industry. At one time, more than 600 mills operated together throughout this valley, pressing oil, sawing timber, grinding cocoa, crushing pigments for paint, and cutting lumber for shipyards. Historians often describe this area as one of the world's earliest industrial regions. Long before steam engines, coal-fired factories, or towering smokestacks, an entire economy was driven by the wind. The Dutch had learned to capture an invisible force from the sky and transform it into flour, timber, trade, and prosperity. Walking among the windmills today, I still found skilled artisans at work. In one workshop, traditional wooden clogs were being hand-carved from solid logs, filling the air with the fresh scent of wood shavings. In another, cheese was still being produced using recipes passed down for generations. This was not simply an open-air museum preserving the past. It was a place where living traditions and authentic craftsmanship continue to thrive. The wind may no longer power industry here, but human hands have never stopped creating. I paused beside one of the windmills and listened as its enormous sails sliced through the air with a deep, rhythmic hum. Then I realized something. The same ingenuity the Dutch had used to keep the land dry had also allowed them to harness the wind itself. The same people, guided by the same philosophy, not conquering nature, but learning how to work with its power. The hands that drew a boundary against the sea had also transformed the wind into a source of economic strength. Zaanse Schans showed me that the Dutch relationship with water and nature has never been about resisting them alone. Sometimes the deepest connection reveals itself in the quietest places. And to understand that even better, my journey would lead me to one of the most unique villages anywhere in the world. The village without roads. At my next destination, there were no cars, no horns, no engines, no asphalt. There was only water, wooden bridges, and charming homes sheltered beneath thatched roofs. Many call it the Venice of the Netherlands. But instead of Venice's grandeur, I found a quiet, rural peace. Ducks drifted gently through the narrow canals that passed in front of the houses. Ironically, Giethoorn's story began with digging. In the 13th century, the farmers and monks who settled here excavated peat from the ground, long before coal became the dominant source of fuel. The pits they left behind gradually filled with water, creating the lakes and canals that define the village today. This peaceful landscape was never planned. It was an unintended mark left behind by people using the land. A mark that slowly transformed into one of the country's most beautiful places. I stepped aboard a small boat. As it glided silently through the canals, the only sound was the gentle movement of water against the hull. At that moment, I felt as though the constant struggle I had witnessed throughout the Netherlands, the pumps, the floodgates, the dikes, and their tireless watch, had finally settled into complete tranquility. Here in Giethoorn, water was more than a neighbor. It was part of everyday life. It was here that I realized living with water also meant living by its rhythm. That was the source of the village's remarkable calm. What fascinated me most was that this quiet corner of the world had become known far beyond the Netherlands. Visitors traveled from distant countries, leaving behind busy cities in search of a few peaceful hours in this village without roads. It was almost as if Giethoorn was asking the modern world a simple question: do we truly need constant movement, or are we searching for peace? One of the most unforgettable destinations of my journey was now behind me. The flower that came from far away, between Haarlem and Leiden. Colorful bands stretched across the landscape as far as I could see. Red, yellow, purple, like enormous carpets laid across the earth. The Dutch simply call this region the ingenious bulb district. To them it may be familiar. To me, it was breathtaking. As the wind swept across the fields, the flowers moved together like waves upon a colorful sea. At the heart of this remarkable landscape lies Keukenhof, one of the world's largest flower gardens, where more than 7 million bulbs bloom each spring. Its design changes every year, creating new colors, new patterns, and a new visual story each season. Yet this flower did not originate in the Netherlands. The tulip arrived here during the 16th century from lands far away. From Turkey. It came first as a gift, then as a curiosity, and eventually as a valuable trade commodity. Over time, it became so deeply woven into Dutch culture that it grew into one of the country's most recognizable symbols. Standing among endless fields of purple tulips, I was struck by the thought that a flower from distant lands had become part of the identity of an entire nation. Then I discovered another remarkable chapter of its story. During the 17th century, tulips grown in this region became so valuable that a single bulb could sell for more than the price of a house. People invested their fields, their fortunes, and their futures in bulbs that had not yet even emerged from the ground. History remembers this period as tulip mania, often described as one of the world's earliest speculative economic bubbles. Then one morning, it all collapsed. The value of the bulbs vanished almost overnight, leaving behind broken fortunes and shattered dreams. Each spring, the millions of bulbs at Keukenhof bloom for only about 2 months before quietly disappearing once again. The gate left open. I continued south into Zealand, where I encountered one of the greatest engineering achievements I'd ever seen. A colossal barrier stretched across the sea itself. 65 massive concrete piers supporting enormous steel gates that extended toward the horizon. It is often regarded as one of the modern world's great engineering achievements. Each concrete pillar weighs around 18,000 tons, carefully positioned with extraordinary precision beneath the sea. It was built after the catastrophic flood of 1953, a night that brought immense devastation and forever changed the country. During that February storm, the sea overwhelmed the dikes, leading to widespread flooding across communities and profoundly altering countless lives and the country's landscape. The Netherlands vowed that such a tragedy would never happen again. This immense barrier became that promise cast in concrete. Yet these giant gates normally remain open. The tides continue to flow freely between them, sustaining the delicate ecosystem beyond, its fish, birds, and saltwater habitats. The gates close only during severe storms, only when genuine danger approaches. The Dutch could have chosen to keep the sea out forever. Instead, they chose to leave it a doorway. That was when the lesson I had begun learning at Afsluitdijk finally became complete. True mastery was not about closing the gate. It was about knowing when to leave it open. The shore time never forgot. For the final coastal chapter of my journey, I visited 2 neighboring communities, Marken and Volendam. Both sit along the shores of the IJsselmeer, close to one another, yet shaped by very different spirits. Colorful wooden houses, historic fishing boats, and the scent of salt drifting through the air welcomed me. For centuries, Marken existed as an island in the middle of the former Zuiderzee. Isolated from the outside world and deeply connected to fishing. It remained that way until a causeway linked it to the mainland in 1957. Volendam, meanwhile, developed as a traditional fishing village. Its long isolation allowed it to preserve its own dialect, clothing, customs, and cultural identity with remarkable authenticity. While the surrounding water separated these communities from the rest of the world, it also gave them the space to remain true to themselves. As I wandered through the narrow streets, I still met people wearing traditional clothing. Things that might only be found behind museum glass elsewhere remain part of everyday life here. Yet, I realized it would be wrong to say these communities were living in the past. They were not preserving history. They were continuing it. During the 19th century, painters traveled here to capture the traditional costumes, the unique coastal light, and the slower rhythm of life. Later, a distinctive musical tradition emerged from the harbor taverns. With songs performed in the local dialect, carrying the longing of fishermen and the quiet melancholy of the sea. Marken and Volendam showed me that isolation is not always a loss. Sometimes, the boundary drawn by the water becomes a place of refuge. The land given back. The deepest moment of my journey was still waiting for me. Along the coast of Zeeland, I walked toward a place called Saeftinghe. The largest tidal salt marsh in Western Europe. Today it belongs to the wind, the mud, and thousands of birds. With every step, my feet sank into the soft, waterlogged earth. While on the horizon, the sea and the land dissolved into one another. But this place had once been something entirely different. There had been fertile fields here. Houses, churches. Families had lived and farmed behind protective dikes. This had once been a village. Then the water came back. What moved me most was the way it returned. Beginning in the 14th century, storms slowly eroded this land. But nature did not deliver the final blow. In 1584, during the war with Spain, Dutch forces deliberately breached the medieval dikes. To stop the enemy's advance, they sacrificed their own villages and farmland, surrendering them to the sea forever. Standing at the edge of the marsh, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Throughout this journey, I had witnessed humanity's remarkable determination to live with water. Dikes, pumps, floodgates, reclaimed land, historic cities rising from the sea. Everywhere, the story had seemed the same. Human determination, water pushed back. But here, with my feet slowly sinking into the mud, I came face to face with another truth. Sometimes you choose to give the land back. And there, at the deepest point of the journey, one thought remained with me. These people have learned not only how to reclaim land from the sea, but also, when necessary, how to return it. The following morning, I found myself somewhere I never expected. I traveled to Flevoland, and there, I found the answer in the most unexpected place, directly beneath my feet. Because the ground I was standing on had been the floor of the sea only a few decades ago, literally. The fields stretching before me, the perfectly straight roads, the neat rows of houses, all of them stood where fish had once swum. This region does not appear on old maps because, in many ways, it is one of the world's newest landscapes, created by human hands from the sea itself. I entered Almere, where modern architecture, wide boulevards, and glass-fronted homes lined carefully planned canals. Nearly 500,000 people now live on land that did not exist on any historical map. Children walk to school and play in parks where deep water once covered everything. These reclaimed polders form one of humanity's largest land reclamation projects. Where waves once rolled, wind turbines now turn. Wheat sways across fertile soil enriched by minerals that rested for centuries beneath the sea. Even more remarkably, wildlife has returned. Deer graze across meadows that were once underwater, while birds that had long disappeared from the Netherlands glide once again through the skies. I sat quietly on a bench and reflected. Only a day earlier, in Saeftinghe, I had seen a people willingly return their land to the sea. Now, I was looking at an entirely new landscape and an entirely new city, born from that same sea. It was the wisdom of letting go and the courage to begin anew, the same people, the same water. That evening, I returned to where the journey had truly begun. The windmills of Kinderdijk. But this time, it was after sunset. Night transformed the landscape completely. The 19 windmills glowed softly from within, their reflections shimmering across the still, dark water of the canal. The real windmills stood above, while their luminous twins floated below. Once each year, during the September illumination evenings, every windmill is lit at the same time, turning the entire landscape into an unforgettable celebration of light. By then, every piece of the journey had begun to fall into place. When I first arrived, I believed these windmills represented a victory over the water. Now I understood that I had been mistaken. They were never built to win. They were built to endure. Their work is never finished. Every day the water returns. Every day they begin again. If this journey through one of Europe's most remarkable destinations has stayed with you, share it with someone who might feel the same. The following day, I returned to Amsterdam one last time before heading home, but I was no longer the same person who had first arrived. I looked once more at the canals. The words of the elderly man by the bridge echoed in my mind. The water is our neighbor. This time, I finally grasped his meaning. For a moment, I returned to the museum I'd visited on my first day. The light emerging from Rembrandt's darkness, the quiet windows painted by Vermeer. When I first saw them, I simply thought they were beautiful. Now I saw something more. The entire city told the story of a long transformation. One that turned water into prosperity, prosperity into art, and art into meaning. The feeling that had quietly appeared the moment my plane touched the runway, the feeling I could not yet name, had finally become clear. The view outside the train window was exactly the same as it had been on my first day. Orderly green fields, a windmill turning slowly in the distance, a cyclist leaning into the wind. Yet it no longer looked the same, because now I could finally see everything beneath the surface. Some places give you information, others change the way you see the world. The Netherlands was one of those places. Eventually, I returned home. Familiar streets, familiar faces, a familiar life. Nothing had changed. Except the questions I was asking. Because what the Netherlands taught me did not stay behind in the Netherlands. Before the water could take everything back, the Dutch had learned to make room for it. They had learned how to say, "this far," without ever saying, "never." They had learned when to close the gate and when to leave it open. And perhaps that is exactly what life is trying to teach all of us. Not to waste our strength fighting everything we cannot control, but to learn how to live alongside it. Every journey leaves something behind and carries something home. What about you? What will you take away from this journey? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Tot ziens, Netherlands.